Welcome to my How Healthy Are You weekly educational podcast. My name is Dr. Thomas Brewer. I'm a PhD chemist and nutritional blood microscopist. Today is November 1st, 2021, and this is podcast number 107. The topic of today's podcast is the 6 pillars of aging. A lot of this information was obtained through Dave Asprey in his book, Superhuman. So this is a bit of a follow-on from the October 4th podcast where I talked about the importance of the mitochondria in the cells. These are the engines of our cells which provide energy, and we must protect these mitochondria. What happens, main causes of death, if there's any sort of damage to the mitochondria: cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and Alzheimer's. So these were all discussed on October 4th. So getting right into the first pillar of aging, and that is shrinking tissue. So when you're young, your body has a lot of something called stem cells. So stem cells are unique cells. They're capable of producing many more cells of the same type. You may have heard of stem cell therapy. It's a very expensive treatment. So typically, cells die all the time through a process called apoptosis. I talked about that previously. So we want apoptosis to occur, and we want to get rid of these dead cells. That's ideal. So we're going to learn later on how it's a problem when we don't get rid of those cells. So if cells die through this process of apoptosis, your stem cells spring into action. They replace the dead cells. Everything's good. But as you age, your stem cell reserves go down, and the stem cells themselves are aging, so they're less efficient. There's fewer of them at replacing dead cells. So the mitochondria, the engines of the cells, typically will not trigger apoptosis at the right time. So some cells die before they're supposed to. That's a bad thing. Others aren't quickly replaced. That's a bad thing. So tissues throughout the body are losing more and more cells, and guess what? That's how they shrink. So you get this atrophy or breakdown as we age. So there's a name for this when it's focused on the muscle tissue. It's called sarcopenia. So when neurons in the brain die and your body isn't able to replace them, your brain also shrinks. So shrinking tissue, bad thing. Okay, now, if you keep your mitochondria healthy, you can avoid a lot of this cell loss. So the point here is to eat foods that boost the efficiency of your mitochondria so they can make more energy. Your body has the raw materials it needs to manufacture proteins and hormones so that the body can function. These foods, you probably guessed, are organic fruits and vegetables, and they are not grains, and they are not charred meat. So we'll get into more of that soon. Okay, pillar number 2 is known as mitochondrial mutation. So that's when the mitochondria mutate themselves. So this means damaged mitochondria. And it is very important because, hey, the mitochondria are the power plants of our cells. So the mitochondrial genome is separate from your human genome. So mitochondria evolved from bacteria. They have their own genetic code. But your mitochondrial DNA serves a real important function. It controls how your body makes energy. This mitochondrial DNA is very susceptible to mutations and more susceptible than your human DNA, so your human genome. And mitochondrial DNA can't really repair itself easily when it's damaged, so you don't want to take as many hits. Excuse me. Okay, so mitochondria DNA can become damaged when there's excess free radicals. And damaged mitochondria generate inflammation and accelerate aging. So therefore, what we want to do is minimize free radicals so we don't damage the mitochondria. And again, what minimizes free radicals? Antioxidants, such as those found in organic fruits and vegetables. Okay, the third pillar was zombie cells. And zombie cells means cells that should have died, should have gone through apoptosis, but for some reason didn't. So these are death-resistant cells. They have a name. They're called sentient cells, but these are cells that won't die when they're worn out. And they're a big focus of anti-aging research. So when a cell should have died and hasn't, they really don't divide or function properly. They're really dead weight. So they're just a toxin to our bodies. And they secrete inflammatory proteins, which are very bad for us. And that leads to inflammation and all the problems that come from inflammation. So the mitochondria in these cells also become dysfunctional. So these are these zombie cells. So you lose both ways. And they release a lot of what's known as reactive oxygen species, which means free radicals. So over time, we get more and more of these zombie or sentient cells, and they create a lot of damage, and that's one of the major causes of aging and disease. So really don't want to have these zombie cells in our tissues because you get less efficient at responding to insulin. So that's one issue, and that's known as you end up with diabetes and insulin resistance. So zombie cells also lead to visceral body fat. So I talked about that earlier. Visceral body fat, that's the fat way under our skin, near our organs. It's the hardest to get rid of, and it's the most dangerous. So we don't want that. So now some of these sentient cells are easier to kill off than others. So once you have healed these immune cells that are supposed to die off, when they don't die, they inhibit your immune system's ability to respond to new infections. So that's the problem if our immune cells become like that. So if our immune cells are good white blood cells, the cells that are part of our immune system, if they become sentient, which means they're not functioning right, that weakens our immune system. So one thing that you may have heard of, and I don't recommend this, but this is something known as a nootropic, and you can take the diabetes drug metformin not because you're diabetic, because it can also kill sentient cells. So I don't recommend that, but I have talked about that years ago when I talked about metformin and nootropics. So anytime you take a drug that accelerates cell turnover, like metformin, there's a risk of accelerating cancer growth because these sentient cells are kind of like cancer cells, right? Cancer cells are very hard to destroy. But there's other things you can do, and the best is to consume seaweed and strawberries. So they both contain a polyphenol that will help kill off these sentient cells, and it's a food. It's not a drug. So seaweed and strawberries, very, very good for that. So the bottom line in this topic, in this section on the zombie cells, if you don't want to die, you must make sure your cells do die. That's the apoptosis, when they're supposed to, and you want to make sure they stay alive when they're supposed to. Okay. The fourth pillar is something called advanced glycation end products. Sometimes this is known as AGE. So I talk a little bit about this in the newsletter this week. So there's this network of proteins between our cells, and that's known as the extracellular matrix. So it protects our tissues from stress and trauma and even gravity. But if it stiffens, that's what you don't want. And this matrix holds your cells together, and it gives your tissues their elasticity. But when you consume sugar in your blood circulates through your system, and it binds with proteins, and that creates this advanced glycation end product, or AGE. So sugar bonding to protein, known as glycation, is a bad thing. And these accelerate the aging process and create oxidative stress on the body, which we all know leads to aging. So there are multiple types of AGEs, but let me just give you the solution is enzymes. Enzymes are the way we can break these AGEs down. So these glycation end products, the result of glycation, sugar bonding to protein, you can break that bond with enzymes. Another reason enzymes are very important in addition to just digesting your food, they lead to longevity. So bottom line here is reducing blood sugar is not optional if you want to become superhuman. So you have to reduce your blood sugar. It's not an option. It's a main cause for our aging and our shortened life expectancy. So another thing that causes these AGEs, these glycation products, is when we eat a food that's normally good for you, but you're allergic to it, and you end up getting the same response. You'll make these glycation end products if you're eating a food in which you have an allergy. So that's why I recommend you identify the foods you're allergic to. I offer a food allergy test. You can get these at many places, but it's vital to know the foods in which you are allergic. So make sure you do that at some point. If you already know you're allergic to a food, well, then avoid that food, because what happens is you'll make these advanced glycation end products, even though you would think you're not. It may not be a protein plus a sugar, but you'll still make these glycation products. So as we age, waste products outside of our cells build up. They actually build up inside and outside the cells. If these aggregates or waste products are outside of our cells, we normally form something called amyloids. You may have heard this term before when you've heard about amyloid plaque and Alzheimer's. So these amyloids start to accumulate, and of course they stick together, they form plaques, and they're essentially gum up the works. And the cells do not interact in a healthy manner. So research on mice shows that low insulin levels lead to the formation of amyloids in the brain. So my point here is most of you have heard on how great it is to be on a low carbohydrate diet, not slow, low carbohydrate diet. And people are going into ketosis and they stay in it for a long time. Well, in actuality, that's a bad thing because you end up with too much of these waste products outside of your cells. So if you want to live longer, sometimes you have to eat a small amount of carbs, sometimes a medium amount of carbs, but you should also avoid sugar and bad fats. So I've talked about that in the past when I talked about proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, and most people know what the bad fats are. So linked to apoptosis, which is when a cell dies, is autophagy, and that's your body getting rid of those dead cells. And what we want to do is boost this autophagy so that we're constantly getting rid of any debris. Again, that's where enzymes come in, so that you can have this cellular autophagy even while you're sleeping. So one way to do this is intermittent fasting. Another is to combine enzymes when you're doing intermittent fasting, and also to get good high-quality sleep. It promotes this cellular autophagy so that your body is getting rid of toxins and dead cells that have already gone through apoptosis. Now, some things that we don't have a lot of control over in this area of the toxins outside of the cells is heavy metals. A lot of problems with copper and cadmium, lead, mercury, and arsenic. One of the easiest ways to get these out of our body, and we're constantly getting bombarded with these heavy metals, is to eat cilantro. It's a simple way to utilize a plant as a chelating agent to pull these metals out. There are other ways, but cilantro is by far the easiest. All right, the fifth pillar is now these toxins build up inside the cells. The last one was outside the cells. This is, we'll call it junk buildup inside the cells. So almost all the cells in your body have their own built-in waste disposal system. The component in the cell is called a lysosome, and they destroy unwanted materials of all kinds, and that's a good thing. But they can't break down certain things, so these products just stay in the cell, and they clog up the cell till the cell doesn't function. So that's a bad thing, and then, of course, it would lead to loss of cells, which means your tissues decrease in size, and that was the first pillar. So the first thing that can happen with these lysosomes is they can just get damaged, and then therefore they don't function properly. They rely on enzymes to break down waste products. So again, if they're relying on enzymes, make sure your body is getting enough enzymes so it can produce more enzymes from the food you eat. So this is a long process of enzymes. There's thousands of different enzymes in the body, but you can keep your body making these enzymes as long as you're digesting and metabolizing the food you eat. Now, the second issue with these lysosomes is they can get damaged by an excess of free radicals. So again, we're right back to antioxidants, which would be organic fruits and vegetables. What's really bad for our lysosomes is when we eat fried, blackened, charred meat. They contain a lot of these glycation end products. It overloads the waste system inside the cell and outside the cell. But when there's all these toxins inside the cell and the cell can't get rid of it, you develop a lot of disease, which shortens life expectancy. Now, you've heard this before. I've talked about not eating charred, blackened meat. So you can always get grass-fed steak with no char. Okay. The final one, pillar 6, is telomere shortening. I've also talked about this. Telomeres are the end caps of your DNA. They protect your chromosomes from fraying with wear and tear. So there's an enzyme called Telomerase, and that's what's responsible for maintaining the telomeres. Now, these telomeres deteriorate over time because each time they're utilized, they provide the blueprint for a cell to copy itself, and every time the telomere is utilized, it shortens. So as you age, your telomeres get shorter, and eventually they get so short you die because they can't even protect you. They can't protect your DNA. So there is a term for how many times a cell can divide. It's called the Hayflick limit. We don't really need to go into it. But one thing to know is the rate at which our telomeres shorten plays a big role in determining how we age. And so you could just look at your telomere length, and that would be a marker of your biological age, whereas if you just go back to your birth date, that's your chronological age. So a good way to know if you're doing well is to ascertain the length of your telomeres. This is a very expensive test, but it will tell you where you stand. Okay, there's a direct connection between telomere shortening and stress. So you can take a product that I have. It's called TA65. It is somewhat expensive. It's going to cost almost $100 a month, $99 a month, just to take this. So for those of you that can't afford TA65 to directly lengthen your telomeres, a couple things you can do. One, there's a direct correlation between telomere shortening and stress. So reduce your stress, breathing exercises, yoga, meditation, all of that. The next is exercise. So exercise is another way of preventing early telomere shortening. Now, if you're doing all that and you're still concerned, well, think about taking TA65. It is a it's a cyclooestragenol, and it's been around for about 20 years now. There's a lot of data on it. I waited many years to carry it, and it works quite well. So that's what I have for today's podcast. If you could please leave a comment and let me know if you like this sort of topic on age reversal and anti-aging and longevity. And as always, please don't keep me a secret.